On the 12th of February, 1929, a woman died at dawn in a clifftop villa in Monaco. Her only companions were a paid nurse and two poodles barking in the next room. Her daughter refused to come. Her husband lived in a separate city. Yet when the news reached London, the newspapers gave her columns usually reserved for royalty. Because this woman had once stopped traffic on Piccadilly simply by walking down the street. She had been the lover of the future King of England, the first celebrity to sell a commercial product, and the owner of a fortune worth $70 million in today's money. Her name was Lillie Langtry, and she had earned every penny of it herself. Chapter 1. The Girl Who Could Not Be Contained. On an island 11 miles long and 5 miles wide, a girl was learning to outrun every boundary drawn around her. Jersey sits in the English Channel like a stone dropped between two countries, belonging fully to neither, closer to France than to England, governed by its own ancient laws, surrounded by tides that could strand a traveler for hours. In the 1850s, it was a place of granite farmhouses, narrow lanes, and a society so small that everybody knew your father's debts and your mother's opinions before you had finished your breakfast. Émilie Charlotte Le Breton was born on the 13th of October, 1853, into the rectory of St. Saviour's Parish. Her father, the Reverend William Corbet Le Breton, was the Dean of Jersey. Her mother was the former Emily Davis, a woman of modest origins and firm convictions. The rectory was comfortable, but not grand. It sat within sight of the church where generations of islanders had been christened, married, and mourned. Lillie, as she would always be called, was the only girl among 6 brothers. This accident of birth shaped everything that followed. She was not raised in the parlor with needlework and deportment lessons. She was raised in the company of boys who climbed trees, jumped fences, and swam in cold water. Their tutor taught them Latin, Greek, and mathematics. He taught Lillie too. No one thought to stop him. She grew tall. Her skin was pale and clear. Her eyes were a shade of blue that people would later describe with the desperate inadequacy of language, comparing them to violets, to the sea, to things that were not actually blue at all, but simply beautiful. By the time she was 14, men on the island were beginning to notice her. By the time she was 16, she had learned something that most women of her era were never permitted to discover, that the way people looked at her was a form of power. But power without an outlet is just frustration. Jersey offered her nothing. The social calendar of the island revolved around church services, garden parties, and the seasonal arrival of military officers stationed at the garrison. A rector's daughter could attend these events. She could not escape through them. Marriage was the only door, and the men who came through the rectory were either too old, too poor, or too dull. She read constantly. She rode horses with a recklessness that alarmed her mother. She sailed in boats that her brothers considered dangerous. A contemporary remembered her vaulting a fence in a single motion, landing on the other side with the ease of someone who had been doing it since childhood. She was not performing femininity. She was ignoring it. The island pressed in on her. 11 miles by 5. You could walk across it in a morning. You could see the sea from almost anywhere. And every horizon reminded you that somewhere beyond the water, there was a world that did not care whether your father was the dean or your dress was appropriate for Sunday. The question that hung over Lillie Le Breton's adolescence was not whether she was beautiful. Everyone could see that she was. The question was what exactly a beautiful woman was supposed to do with herself on a rock in the English Channel, where the most exciting event of the year, was the Battle of Flowers Parade. She wanted something. She could not yet name it, but the wanting was so fierce that it would eventually carry her off the island, out of her class, beyond every rule her world had written for women, and into a life so extraordinary that when she died, the newspapers of London would mourn her as though she had been a queen. All she needed was a way out. And in 1874, a way out sailed into the harbor. Chapter 2. The Yacht She Married. Lillie Langtry did not fall in love with Edward Langtry. She fell in love with his 80-foot yacht. He arrived in Jersey the way wealthy men arrived everywhere in the 1870s. By water, with leisure, and with no particular purpose. Edward Langtry was an Irish widower with a private income and a taste for sailing. He was not handsome. He was not clever. He was not ambitious. But he had the red gauntlet, and the red gauntlet could take a woman anywhere in the world. Lillie saw the yacht before she saw the man. She saw the promise of open water, of coastlines she had never touched, of a life measured in nautical miles rather than parish boundaries. When Edward proposed, she accepted with the enthusiasm of a prisoner who has been offered a key. They married on the 9th of March, 1874. She was 20 years old. The early months were everything she had imagined. They sailed to places she had only read about. But Edward Langtry had a fatal flaw common to men who inherit money rather than earn it. He confused possession with accomplishment. He believed that owning a beautiful wife was the same as deserving one. He believed that a yacht and an income were enough to hold the attention of the most restless woman in the Channel Islands. He was wrong. They moved to London in 1876. Their first year was invisible. They rented rooms in Eaton Place, attended a few dinners, and discovered that London society was a fortress whose gates did not open to unknown couples from Jersey. Lillie had no connections. Edward had no charm. They drifted. Then came the evening that changed everything. In the spring of 1877, Lillie attended a reception at the home of Lady Seabright. Every other woman in the room wore silk, satin, and diamonds. The fashion of the era demanded layers, ornament, and expense. Lillie arrived in a plain black dress, no jewelry, no embroidery. Her hair was pulled back simply. In a room full of decorated women, she was the only one who looked like a painting. The effect was instantaneous. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Frank Miles, a society artist, crossed the room to ask if he could sketch her. Within days, his drawings of Lillie were reproduced on postcards and sold in every stationer's shop in London. John Everett Millais, the most celebrated painter of the age, asked her to sit for him. His portrait, titled A Jersey Lily, was exhibited at the Royal Academy and drew crowds so thick that a policeman had to be stationed beside it. She had become what the Victorians called a professional beauty. The term was new, the phenomenon was new, and it was made possible by a technology that had nothing to do with beauty at all. In the 1870s, advances in photographic reproduction and mass printing had created a market for images of attractive women. Postcards could be produced cheaply and sold for pennies. A woman whose face appeared on enough postcards became, in effect, a brand. Lillie's face appeared on more postcards than any other woman in England. Shops displayed her image in their windows. Crowds gathered outside theaters and restaurants where she was expected to appear. On at least one occasion, traffic on Piccadilly stopped because word had spread that Lillie Langtry was walking down the street. The economics were staggering. Postcard manufacturers sold hundreds of thousands of images. Lillie earned nothing from them directly, not yet. but the fame they generated was its own currency. Doors that had been closed to Mrs. Edward Langtry of Eaton Place now flew open for the Jersey Lillie. Edward watched all of this with the bewildered passivity of a man who has brought home a tiger cub and is surprised when it grows teeth. He was not equipped for fame. He was not equipped for the demands it placed on his purse, his pride, or his marriage. He began to drink. Lillie barely noticed. She was too busy becoming the most famous woman in England. And among the many powerful men now desperate for her attention, one stood above all others. He was not the richest. He was not the most handsome, but he was the heir to the throne. And when the Prince of Wales decided he wanted something, the entire machinery of British society rearranged itself to accommodate him. Chapter 3. The Prince Who Rearranged the Room. When the Prince of Wales wanted Lillie Langtry beside him, he simply moved her husband to the other end of the table. The dinner took place on the 24th of May, 1877, at the home of Sir Allen Young, an Arctic explorer with excellent social connections and a gift for seating arrangements. The Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII, was 45 years old, bearded, stout, and possessed of an appetite for beautiful women that was the worst-kept secret in the British Empire. He arrived that evening expecting a pleasant dinner. He left having decided that Lillie Langtry would be his next companion. Within weeks, they were inseparable. But the mechanics of a royal affair in Victorian England were as elaborate as the workings of a Swiss clock. Every part had to move in precise coordination, or the whole machine would shatter. First, society had to be informed. This was accomplished not through announcements, but through gestures. The prince began appearing with Lillie at dinners, at the theater, at country house weekends. He was not subtle. He did not need to be. When the Prince of Wales displayed his preference, the correct response from society was acceptance, not inquiry. Second, the Princess of Wales had to consent. And here the arrangement reached its most remarkable accommodation. Princess Alexandra, a Danish beauty who had long since made peace with her husband's infidelities, did more than tolerate Lillie. She received her. She invited her to events. She treated her with a warmth that was either genuine grace or the most disciplined performance in the history of royal marriages. The message to society was clear. If the princess accepted Mrs. Langtry, then Mrs. Langtry was acceptable. Third, the Queen herself had to acknowledge the situation. In 1878, Lillie was presented at court. She walked into Buckingham Palace wearing the Prince of Wales's own emblem, 3 ostrich feathers arranged in her hair. The audacity of the gesture was breathtaking. It announced, in the visual language that the court understood perfectly, that she belonged to the prince and that the prince did not mind the world knowing it. Queen Victoria, who publicly deplored her son's morals and privately could do nothing about them, received Lillie without comment. Edward Langtry became a ghost in his own marriage. At dinners, he was seated far from his wife, sometimes at a separate table. He was expected to be present enough to maintain the fiction that Lillie was a respectable married woman, and absent enough to allow the prince his pleasures. It was a role that would have required either extraordinary dignity or extraordinary stupidity to sustain. Edward Langtry possessed the latter. The affair lasted roughly 3 years, and during those years, Lillie occupied a position that no woman outside the aristocracy had ever held. She was not a wife. She was not a courtesan in the traditional sense. She was something new, a woman of no particular birth and no particular fortune who had been elevated to the inner circle of British power through the force of her beauty and the desire of a prince. The prince gave her gifts. He gave her access. He gave her the reflected glow of royal favor, which in Victorian England was worth more than money because it could be converted into money by anyone clever enough to understand the exchange rate. Lillie understood it perfectly. She moved through the grandest rooms in England. She sat at tables with dukes and diplomats. She wore gowns that cost more than her father earned in a year. And through it all, she watched. She learned how power worked. She learned who controlled the money, who controlled the invitations, and who controlled the information. She learned that beauty opened doors, but it did not keep them open. Something else was needed for that. She filed this knowledge away. She would need it sooner than she expected, because a royal affair, however intoxicating, has a natural lifespan. The Prince of Wales collected women the way other men collected paintings. He admired them intensely, displayed them prominently, and eventually moved them to a less visible wall. By 1880, the signs were unmistakable. The invitations grew less frequent. The dinners grew shorter. The prince's attention had begun to drift toward other faces, other novelties. Lillie Langtry, at 26, was about to discover what happens when the most powerful man in England stops returning your letters. And the answer would force her to become something far more dangerous than a mistress. It would force her to become a businesswoman. Chapter 4. The Crack That Became a Door. The end of a royal affair is not a private matter. It is a financial catastrophe. When the Prince of Wales withdrew his favor from Lillie Langtry in 1880, the consequences arrived with the speed and precision of a foreclosure. The gifts stopped, the invitations dried up, and the creditors, who had extended generous terms to a woman under royal protection, suddenly remembered that generosity has limits. Lillie had been living on credit. This was not unusual for someone in her position. The entire system of Victorian society ran on the assumption that connections were collateral. A woman attached to the Prince of Wales could charge anything to any account and expect it to be honored. A woman detached from the Prince of Wales was just another debtor with excellent cheekbones. The debts were significant. Dressmakers, milliners, florists, wine merchants, and the landlord of her London home all presented their bills within weeks of each other. The timing was not coincidental. In the gossip economy of Mayfair, the news of a royal cooling traveled faster than the post. Edward Langtry was useless. His own inheritance was largely spent. His drinking had progressed from social habit to daily necessity. He sat in their drawing room with a glass of whiskey and the bewildered expression of a man who could not understand why the party had ended. He had never understood why it had begun. Lillie sold her possessions. The furniture went first, then the horses, then the jewelry that was hers to sell. She kept the pieces given by the prince, partly from sentiment and partly because selling royal gifts would have been a social admission she was not yet prepared to make. And then, in the middle of this unraveling, she discovered she was pregnant. The father was almost certainly not Edward Langtry. The most likely candidate was Arthur Jones, a friend of the prince with whom Lillie had begun a discreet relationship. But the identity of the father mattered less than the problem the pregnancy represented. A child born to Lillie Langtry in London, in full view of a society that had watched her share a bed with the future king, would be a scandal of unmanageable proportions. The mathematics of conception would be discussed. The prince would be embarrassed, and an embarrassed prince was a dangerous enemy. Lillie disappeared. She crossed the Channel to Paris, where she gave birth to a daughter on the 8th of March, 1881. The baby was named Jean Marie, and within weeks she was given away. The arrangement was cold in its efficiency. Jean Marie was sent to Lillie's mother in Jersey. She would be raised as the daughter of one of Lillie's brothers, a brother who had conveniently died young. Lillie would visit as an aunt. The child would never know. The secret would hold. It was the deepest deception of Lillie Langtry's life. And unlike her affairs, her debts, and her social performances, this deception carried a price that compounded over decades. But that bill would not come due for years. In the spring of 1881, Lillie had a more immediate problem. She needed money. The solution she chose scandalized London more thoroughly than any affair. On the 15th of December, 1881, Lillie Langtry walked onto the stage of the Haymarket Theatre and delivered her first lines as Kate Hardcastle in She Stoops to Conquer. She was the first society woman in living memory to become a professional actress. The reaction was volcanic. Society women did not work. Society women certainly did not display themselves on a public stage for money. The fact that Lillie had been displaying herself in drawing rooms for free for 4 years was, apparently, beside the point. The distinction between a woman admired in a private home and a woman applauded in a public theater was the distinction between a lady and something else entirely. Lillie understood this distinction perfectly. She also understood that distinction does not pay bills. The reviews were mixed. Her acting was competent but not inspired. Her stage presence, however, was extraordinary. She filled a theater the way she filled a room, with the magnetic pull of a woman whom everyone in the audience already knew, already had opinions about, and desperately wanted to watch. The box office was excellent. Oscar Wilde, who had been among her earliest admirers and had once slept on her doorstep with a bouquet of lilies, encouraged her theatrical ambitions. He saw what the critics could not, that Lillie's talent was not acting. Her talent was being Lillie Langtry in public, and a theater was simply the most efficient venue for converting that talent into cash. She played a short season in London. The houses were full. The reviews improved slightly. And then Lillie made the decision that would transform her from a disgraced society beauty into one of the wealthiest women of her generation. She booked a passage to New York. Chapter 5. The Woman Who Outsold Sarah Bernhardt. On her opening night in New York, Lillie Langtry earned $1,000 more than the most famous actress in the world. She arrived in America in October 1882 aboard the Arizona and discovered that the country had been waiting for her. The newspapers had been running stories about the Jersey Lillie for months. Her beauty, her royal affair, her dramatic fall from society, her scandalous decision to go on the stage. It was a narrative that the American press, already developing its genius for celebrity, could not resist. When she stepped onto the dock, reporters outnumbered the customs officials. Her opening at Wallack's Theatre on the 30th of October was a phenomenon. She played the lead in an unequal match to an audience that included the Vanderbilts, the Astors, and every significant social figure in Manhattan. The house was sold out. The receipts totaled $6,800. Sarah Bernhardt, the greatest actress of the century, had earned $5,800 on her own New York opening. Lillie had beaten her by $1,000, and she could not act half as well. The point was never the acting. The point was the spectacle. And Lillie had grasped something about the American appetite for spectacle that most European performers never understood. Americans did not want perfection. They wanted proximity to fame. They wanted to sit in a darkened theater and watch a woman who had kissed a future king deliver lines by candlelight. The acting was secondary. The woman was the product. She launched her first coast-to-coast tour. She played San Francisco, Chicago, St. Louis, and dozens of smaller cities where audiences who had seen her postcards finally saw the face in the flesh. She traveled with a full company, a personal staff, and an expanding wardrobe. She earned and she spent. But unlike the men who had supported her, Lillie kept accounts. She invested $100,000 in Fifth Avenue real estate during her first American visit. She bought property the way her former lover bought racehorses, with an instinct for value that transcended her formal education. New York real estate in the 1880s was appreciating rapidly. Lillie understood appreciation. Then came the endorsement that changed advertising forever. In 1882, Thomas J. Barrett, the managing director of Piers Soap, approached Lillie with an offer. He wanted her to lend her face and her name to his product. She would be photographed holding a bar of Piers Soap, and the image would appear in newspapers and magazines across Britain and America. In exchange, she would be paid a fee. No woman of social standing had ever endorsed a commercial product. The practice was considered vulgar, undignified, and dangerously close to the behavior of women who sold things other than soap. Lillie said yes. The advertisement ran. It was reproduced millions of times. It became the foundational moment of modern celebrity endorsement, the first time a famous face was attached to a consumer product with the explicit purpose of selling more of it. Every perfume advertisement, every athletic shoe campaign, every celebrity fragrance line can trace its lineage to Lillie Langtry holding a bar of soap. The financial architecture of her empire was methodical. She earned from 7 distinct streams: theatrical performances on tour, theatrical performances in London, real estate investments in New York, endorsement fees, gifts from wealthy admirers, prize money from horse racing, and rental income from properties. An estimated $10 million passed through her hands over the course of her career. By 1898, her personal fortune was approximately $2 million, a sum worth between $70 and $80 million in today's currency. She commissioned the Lillie, a private Pullman railroad car, for her American tours. It was 60 feet long, upholstered in velvet, and decorated with polished brass lilies on every fitting. It contained a drawing room, a bedroom, a kitchen, and quarters for her staff. She traveled across America in this rolling palace, arriving at each city like a head of state, stepping from her private car onto platforms where crowds had gathered since dawn. And there was Frederick Gebhard. Young, handsome, reckless, and heir to a fortune estimated at $5 million, Gebhard fell in love with Lillie in New York and proceeded to spend money on her with the determination of a man trying to extinguish a fire with banknotes. He bought her horses. He bought her jewelry. He accompanied her on tour. He fought duels over her honor. His family despaired. Lillie accepted his devotion and his gifts with the practiced grace of a woman who understood exactly what was being exchanged. By the end of the 1880s, Lillie Langtry had done something unprecedented. She had taken beauty, the most fleeting currency a Victorian woman possessed, and converted it into wealth that did not depend on any man's continued affection. She owned property. She owned investments. She owned her own theatrical company. She was, in every meaningful sense, self-made. But every fortune built on the patronage of men carries a hidden cost. And the cost was about to present itself in a hotel room with a closed fist and a checkbook. Chapter 6: The Price Paid in Bruises and Silence. When Squire Abington blackened her eye, Lillie Langtry calculated the cost at £5,000 per blow. Robert Peel, known as Squire Abington, was one of several wealthy men who moved through Lillie's orbit in the 1880s. He was possessive, violent, and rich. The combination was not unusual among men of his class and era. What was unusual was Lillie's response to his violence, which was neither terror nor submission, but arithmetic. He beat her in hotel rooms. He destroyed furniture. He threw objects. On at least one occasion, he struck her in the face with enough force to blacken her eye, a catastrophe for a woman whose face was, quite literally, her fortune. She spent 10 days recovering from one attack, hidden from public view, canceling performances, losing income, and she kept going back. Her explanation, recorded by contemporaries, remains one of the coldest calculations in Victorian social history. "I detest him," she said, "but every time he does it, he gives me a check for £5,000. The mathematics were brutal. £5,000 in the 1880s was roughly $600,000 today. A black eye healed in 2 weeks. The money lasted considerably longer. This was not masochism. It was not love. It was the logical endpoint of a system that treated women's bodies as commodities. If your face is your capital, then damage to your face is a business expense, and business expenses can be compensated. Lillie had learned the rules of this system so thoroughly that she could negotiate within it, even when it was literally beating her. But violence was not the only cost of the patronage economy. Frederick Gebhard, who had showered Lillie with money and devotion for years, was also extracting payment in his own currency: emotional dependency. He wanted to own her. He wanted exclusivity. He wanted the one thing Lillie had never given any man: genuine control. The tension between them produced its most dramatic rupture on a summer day in 1888, on a stretch of railroad near Shohola, Pennsylvania. Gebhard's private train, carrying his racing stable, derailed catastrophically. 14 horses were killed. Among them was Aole, his champion runner, a horse valued at tens of thousands of dollars. Gebhard was physically unharmed, but financially and emotionally devastated. His accusation was immediate and revealing. "You have already cost me a fortune," he told Lillie, as though the dead horses were somehow her fault, as though loving a woman like Lillie Langtry inevitably produced wreckage. The relationship survived the crash, but not the resentment. Within months, they had begun the slow process of separation that Lillie had perfected with previous lovers. The gradual withdrawal, the diminishing availability, the final conversation that was less a breakup than a renegotiation of terms. Lillie Langtry, at 35, was wealthy, famous, and profoundly compromised. She had built a fortune, but its foundations rested on the desires of unstable men. She had created an empire, but its maintenance required her to endure violence, manipulation, and the constant performance of availability. She was the most independent woman of her era, and she could not walk down a street without calculating which man she needed to charm, which man she needed to avoid, and which man she needed to forgive for hitting her. And beneath all of this, buried in Jersey under a false name and a fabricated parentage, her daughter was growing up calling her aunt. Jean-Marie was 7 years old. She had her mother's eyes. She had no idea who her mother was. The trap was elegant in its cruelty. Lillie could not acknowledge her daughter without destroying the reputation that generated her income. She could not abandon her income without losing the independence that made her life bearable. She could not escape the patronage system without sacrificing the wealth she had accumulated within it. Something had to change. And in 1892, Lillie found the one arena where her hunger for competition, her gift for calculation, and her refusal to accept limitation would combine into something extraordinary. She discovered horse racing, but the Jockey Club had rules. And the most inflexible rule was that no woman could own a racehorse. Chapter 7. The Pseudonym That Fooled Nobody. The Jockey Club said no woman could own a racehorse, so Lillie Langtry became a man named Mr. Jersey. The decision to enter racing was not a whim. It was a strategic calculation of the kind that Lillie had been making since she chose a black dress over diamonds at Lady Seabright's reception. Horse racing in late Victorian England was the sport of kings and aristocrats, a world of immense wealth, social prestige, and legalized gambling. It was also a world from which women were excluded with the cheerful finality that characterized most British institutions. The Jockey Club's regulations did not explicitly prohibit female ownership. They simply assumed it was unthinkable. The registration forms required an owner's name. The name had to be a gentleman's. Lillie registered her horses under the name Mr. Jersey, with racing colors of turquoise and fawn hoops. The alias was transparent. Everyone in the racing world knew that Mr. Jersey was Lillie Langtry. The Jockey Club knew it. The bookmakers knew it. The crowds at Newmarket and Ascot knew it. Nobody objected. This was the genius of the stratagem. By adopting a male pseudonym, Lillie had given the Jockey Club what it needed most: deniability. The rules were technically unbroken. The fiction was maintained. And Lillie was free to spend her money, train her horses, and collect her winnings without anyone having to acknowledge that a woman was competing in the most masculine arena in British public life. She bought her first serious racehorse, Dorado, in the early 1890s. But it was Merman who would make her fortune on the turf. Purchased for 1,600 guineas, Merman was a chestnut colt with stamina that exceeded his breeding. Under the turquoise and fawn, he became one of the most successful long-distance runners in English racing. The Kesarewitch of 1897 was the race that announced Lillie Langtry as a force in the sport. Merman started at odds of 100-7, a price that reflected the bookmaker's opinion that he had almost no chance. He won. The result sent shockwaves through the betting world. Lillie had backed her horse heavily. The precise amount she collected on that single race is disputed, but contemporary accounts place it at approximately £120,000. In today's money, that figure exceeds $15 million. It was more than most aristocratic families earned in a decade. It was won in a single afternoon by a rector's daughter from a 5-mile-wide island who was not, officially, permitted to own the horse that earned it. She went on winning: the Lewis Autumn Handicap, the Goodwood Cup, the Jockey Club Cup, and then, in 1900, the prize that crowned her racing career, the Ascot Gold Cup, won by her horse at odds of 20-1. Lillie was 46 years old. She stood in the owner's enclosure, accepting congratulations from the same aristocrats who had cut her from their guest lists when the prince grew tired of her. The irony was not lost on her. It was never lost on her. Her personal life during this period produced its most peculiar chapter. On the 27th of July, 1899, the same day that Merman won the Goodwood Cup, Lillie married Hugo Gerald de Bathe. He was a young man of no particular achievement, 19 years her junior, with the distinction of being heir to a baronetcy. The marriage was a transaction as transparent as Mr. Jersey. Hugo got a famous wife. Lillie got a title, or the eventual promise of one, when Hugo's father died and the baronetcy passed to him. Hugo's father, Sir Henry de Bathe, received the news of his son's marriage with a fury that became one of the most quoted reactions in the social history of the era. He reportedly declared that he wished he could die immediately so that his will, which would cut Hugo off from the family fortune, could go into effect at once. Sir Henry did not, in fact, die immediately. He lived until 1907, giving his son and daughter-in-law 8 years of simmering resentment before the baronetcy and its reduced income finally changed hands. Lillie became Lady de Bath. She and Hugo settled into an arrangement of mutual convenience. He lived his life, she lived hers. They occupied separate residences for most of their marriage. It was, by Lillie's standards, a perfectly satisfactory relationship. But while Lillie was winning gold cups and collecting titles, a reckoning was approaching that no amount of money or social maneuvering could prevent. Her daughter had been growing up, and secrets, unlike racehorses, do not run faster the more you invest in them. Chapter 8: The Daughter Who Discovered the Lie. At a party, Jean-Marie Langtry learned that the woman she called aunt was actually her mother. The circumstances of the discovery have the terrible banality of most life-changing revelations. It did not happen in a dramatic confrontation or a deathbed confession. It happened at a social gathering, in the middle of a conversation, when someone who assumed Jean-Marie already knew mentioned the truth that everyone else in the room had always known. Jean-Marie had been raised in Jersey by Lillie's mother. She had been told that her parents were dead, that Lillie was her aunt, a glamorous and occasionally visiting relative who sent money and presents but never stayed long. The fiction was maintained with the cooperation of a family that understood the social necessity of the lie and the financial consequences of the truth. She had grown into a young woman. She had her mother's blue eyes. She did not have her mother's temperament, or perhaps she simply never had the opportunity to develop it. Where Lillie was restless, Jean-Marie was composed. Where Lillie calculated, Jean-Marie simply endured. The moment of discovery, whenever and however it precisely occurred, produced a response that was devastating in its quietness. Jean-Marie did not make a scene. She did not confront Lillie publicly. She politely left the party. And then, in the days and weeks that followed, she began the process of withdrawal that would last for the rest of her mother's life. There was a confrontation. The details are sparse, filtered through the discretion of an era that considered family disputes private. What is known is that Jean-Marie asked questions, and that the answers she received were not sufficient. They could not have been sufficient. No explanation could bridge the gap between the mother who had given her away and the elaborate fiction that had been constructed to justify the abandonment. Jean-Marie married Ian Malcolm, a Scottish politician who would later become a member of Parliament. They had 4 children. They lived in Scotland. The door between mother and daughter did not close with a slam. It closed with the soft, irreversible click of a woman who had decided that some wounds do not heal, and some relationships cannot be rebuilt on the ruins of a lie. Lillie did not discuss the estrangement publicly. She never acknowledged her daughter in any public statement. She never corrected the official version of events, which continued to maintain the fiction that Jean-Marie was her niece. Whether this was shame, pride, self-protection, or simply habit is impossible to determine. Lillie had been performing so long that the boundary between strategy and emotion had dissolved, and the performances continued. In the 1890s and the early 1900s, Lillie's theatrical career reached its artistic peak. She played Rosalind in As You Like It at the St. James's Theatre, and sold out every performance for 4 months. She played Cleopatra and received 14 curtain calls on opening night. Critics who had dismissed her early work acknowledged that she had developed genuine skill, a command of the stage that went beyond celebrity and into craft. In 1891, she returned to Jersey. The reception was extraordinary. The island that had produced her now claimed her. Crowds lined the streets. The governor received her. The churches rang their bells. The rector's daughter, who had fled on a yacht, had come back as the most famous woman in the British Empire. She stood on the island where she had learned to climb trees and vault fences, where she had read Latin with her brothers and stared at horizons that promised everything. She was 37 years old. She was rich, famous, and adored by strangers. Somewhere in a house in Jersey, or perhaps in a school in England, her daughter was 10 years old and did not know that the woman being celebrated in the streets was the woman who had given her life and then given her away. The applause was thunderous, but there was one pair of hands that would never clap for her. Lillie could command a theater. She could command a race course. She could command a drawing room, a dinner table, a newspaper headline, and the attention of a prince. But she could not command the forgiveness of a child she had treated as a secret. And as the new century approached, she would discover that she could not command something else: time itself. Chapter 9. The world that stopped watching. The movies, the wireless, and a generation that no longer gathered in thousands just to stare at a beautiful woman. The world that had made Lillie Langtry possible was disappearing. It was not dying suddenly in a single dramatic collapse, but fading gradually, like a photograph left too long in sunlight, its outlines growing soft, its contrasts losing their sharpness. The professional beauty had been a product of specific conditions: a society hungry for spectacle, a printing technology that could reproduce images cheaply, and the absence of competing visual entertainment. In the 1870s and 80s, seeing a beautiful woman in person was an event. There was no cinema to project larger faces on larger screens. There was no wireless to carry voices into living rooms. The human body, displayed in a drawing room or on a stage, was the primary medium of visual culture. And Lillie had mastered that medium more completely than anyone alive. But by 1900, the medium was changing. Motion pictures arrived in London in the late 1890s. By 1910, picture palaces were opening across Britain. The wireless was coming. The gramophone was already here. The world was developing an appetite for entertainment that was mechanical, reproducible, and cheap. A beautiful woman in a theater cost a ticket. A beautiful woman on a screen cost a penny. The economics were merciless. Lillie saw what was happening. She was too intelligent not to see it. In 1913, she made a single motion picture, a short, silent film that has been largely lost. It was a gesture toward the future, but her heart was not in it. The camera did not love her the way an audience loved her. It could not capture the quality that had stopped traffic on Piccadilly, the luminous presence that required proximity, that demanded you share the same room, breathe the same air. On film, she was just a woman. In person, she had been a force of nature. Meanwhile, the men who had shaped her life were reaching their ends. Edward Langtry, the man whose yacht had been her ticket off the island, was found demented at Crewe railway station in October 1897. He was confused, disheveled, and unable to explain who he was or where he was going. He was committed to Chester County Asylum, where he died on the 15th of October, 1897. The cause of death was recorded as general paralysis of the insane, a term that in the medical language of the era almost certainly indicated the final stage of syphilis. He was 51 years old. The yacht that Lillie had married was long gone, sold years before to pay debts. The Prince of Wales, who had moved her husband to the other end of the table, ascended the throne as King Edward VII in 1901. He reigned for 9 years. He died in 1910 at the age of 68, mourned by the nation and by at least a dozen women who had shared his private hours. Whether Lillie mourned him is unrecorded. She had always been careful about which emotions she displayed and to whom. Lillie continued to perform. She toured America again in the 1900s, playing smaller theaters and shorter seasons. She appeared in vaudeville. The trajectory was familiar to anyone who had watched the careers of aging performers. The venues grew less grand, the audiences grew smaller, and the reviews began to include the word still, as in, she still has presence, she still commands attention, the adverb that means the end is coming. The Manchester Guardian published a verdict that captured the shift in a single sentence. "A world with the movies and the wireless," the critic wrote, "has more to do than mob a handsome woman." It was an obituary for an era disguised as a theatrical review. By 1920, Lillie was 66 years old. She had retired from the stage. She lived in Monaco. She attended the casino. She read. She watched the world she had conquered grow smaller in her rearview mirror. The women who succeeded her, the movie stars and the radio personalities, did not know her name. They did not know that the entire machinery of modern celebrity, the endorsements, the personal branding, the conversion of fame into fortune, had been invented by a rector's daughter from Jersey who had figured it all out with nothing but a plain black dress and a refusal to be poor. The world had stopped watching, and Lillie, who had lived in the gaze of others since she was 23 years old, had to learn what it meant to live without it. Chapter 10. The Villa with a Room for Poodles. In her final years, Lillie Langtry dyed her hair, danced with gigolos, and kept a room adjoining her bedroom for her dogs. The Villa Lillie sat on the cliffs above Monte Carlo, its windows facing the Mediterranean, its gardens fragrant with the flowers that gave it its name. Lillie had purchased it as a retreat. It became her world. Hugo de Bathe lived in Nice, 15 miles away by road. They saw each other occasionally. The arrangement suited them both. Hugo had his pleasures. Lillie had hers. The marriage had long since settled into the comfortable irrelevance that both parties preferred. Her days followed a pattern. She rose late. She read widely, favoring novels and newspapers. She walked in the gardens. She attended the Casino de Monte Carlo in the evenings, where she gambled with the careful moderation of a woman who understood the odds. She dyed her hair the shade of auburn that it had been in her youth, a vanity that she made no effort to disguise. She danced at social events, sometimes with professional dancing partners, the young men whom the French called gigolos, and she did so with the unapologetic pleasure of a woman who had never pretended to be anything other than what she was. Her poodles occupied a room adjacent to her bedroom. She spoiled them extravagantly. They were, in the final years, her most reliable companions. Somerset Maugham encountered her in Monaco and left a sketch of a woman who had grown old without growing sentimental. She was still witty. She was still sharp. She had simply contracted her life to a size that she could manage alone. Alfred Lunt, the American actor, met her when she was 63 years old and later recalled that she had the bluest eyes he had ever seen. The beauty that had launched 1,000 postcards was faded, but not gone. It lingered in her bone structure, in the way she held herself, in the directness of her gaze. She looked at you, Lunt remembered, as though she were deciding whether you were worth the effort. She was not sentimental about her past. She published a memoir in 1925, The Days I Knew, that was notable more for what it omitted than what it included. She never confirmed her affair with the prince. She never acknowledged her daughter. She never discussed the men who had beaten her or the money they had paid in compensation. She declined, as she had always declined, to give the public the full truth. They could have the performance. The private self was not for sale. She made her will. £10,000 went to Mathilde Piet, her paid companion. Nothing went to Jean-Marie. Whether this was punishment, pride, or a final acknowledgement that the relationship had been severed beyond repair, Lillie never explained. She never explained anything she did not wish to explain. The winter of 1928 brought illness. She weakened through January. By February, it was clear that she was dying. And so we returned to where we began, a villa on a cliff, a nurse, 2 poodles, and a woman who had spent 60 years performing for the world, now facing the one audience she could not charm. Chapter 11. The Captain Who Brought Red Lilies. Through February blizzards, her body crossed the channel to an island she had spent her whole life trying to leave. Lillie Langtry died at dawn on the 12th of February, 1929. She was 75 years old. The nurse recorded the time. The poodles were taken to another room. Hugo de Bathe was notified in Nice. The newspapers were notified in London, and the machinery of death, which Lillie had avoided thinking about for as long as possible, began to move. She had requested burial in Jersey. The request surprised no one who understood her. For all her restlessness, for all her escapes, for all the yachts and railroad cars and villas that had carried her away from the island, Jersey was where she had begun. It was where her parents were buried. It was, in the end, the only place that had known her before she became a brand. But February was cruel. Blizzards swept across the channel. The seas were violent. The crossing that normally took hours became an ordeal of days. Her coffin was placed aboard the steamer Saint-Brieuc, which fought through heavy weather to reach the island. St. Saviour's Church, where her father had preached and where she had been christened, was prepared for the funeral. The flowers arrived in quantities that threatened to overwhelm the small building. They came from London, from Paris, from New York. They came from people who had known her and people who had only known her name. They came from the titled, the wealthy, and the obscure. The service was attended by the island's dignitaries. Hugo de Bathe was present, performing his final duty as a husband. Jean-Marie was not there. She had not come. She would not come. Among the mourners was an aged man who attracted little attention, but whose presence carried a weight that only a few people in the church could have understood. He was the former captain of the Red Gauntlet, the yacht that had brought Edward Langtry to Jersey more than 50 years before. The yacht that Lillie had married. The ship that had been her first escape. He was old now, walking slowly, leaning on a stick. He carried a bouquet of red Jersey lilies, the flower that shared her name, the flower that grew wild on the island she had spent her life leaving, and to which she now returned for the last time. He placed the flowers on her grave. He was the only person there who remembered the girl, not the Jersey Lily, not Mrs. Langtry, not Lady de Bathe, the girl, the rector's daughter who had climbed trees and jumped fences and stared at the sea with a hunger that no island could satisfy. She was buried in her parents' tomb in the churchyard of St. Saviour's, on the island that measured 11 miles by 5. The stone would carry her name. The wind would carry the smell of the sea, and the boundaries she had spent her entire life outrunning would, at last, contain her. Chapter 12. Too damn bright. A contemporary said it would be hell to be married to her because she was too damn bright. The remark was intended as a warning. It reads now as a tribute. What survives of Lillie Langtry is scattered across an unlikely geography. The grave in St. Saviour's churchyard draws visitors who have read her name in history books and come to see the final resting place of a woman who once stopped traffic. The Jersey Museum holds artifacts from her life: photographs, playbills, the material residue of a career that spanned 4 decades and 2 continents. In Langtry, Texas, a town named for her by a man she may never have met, Judge Roy Bean's saloon still stands as a tourist attraction. Bean, a self-appointed justice of the peace in the Pecos River country, was so infatuated with Lillie that he named his bar the Jersey Lillie, misspelling the name on the sign. He wrote her letters she never answered. He named his town for her. He died in 1903 without ever having seen her in person, though she visited the town shortly after his death. Today, the saloon draws 100,000 visitors a year, pilgrims to the shrine of a man's obsession with a woman who existed for him only as a photograph. In California, a vine that Lillie planted in 1888 still grows. It produces grapes. It does not know that the woman who planted it once earned 120,000 pounds on a single horse race. At Goodwood Racecourse, the Lillie Langtry Stakes is run each year, a flat race for fillies and mares, a category restriction that the original Mr. Jersey would have appreciated. These fragments are the scattered evidence of a life that was, above all, a sustained act of conversion. Lillie Langtry took the most ephemeral thing a woman of her era could possess, her physical beauty, and converted it into the most durable thing: money. She took the most dangerous position a woman could occupy, a royal mistress, and converted it into the most liberating one: independence. She took a system designed to consume women, to use their beauty and discard them when it faded, and she reversed its current. She was the one who used. She was the one who discarded. The men who believed they owned her paid for that belief with everything they had. Edward Langtry died insane in a county asylum. Frederick Gebhard spent millions and received nothing but heartache and dead horses. Squire Abington paid 5,000 pounds per bruise and gained only contempt. Hugo de Bathe outlived her and inherited a title that came with the memory of a wife who had never needed him. Lillie died, titled Comfortable and Alone. The title came from a husband she did not love. The comfort came from a fortune she had built herself. The solitude came from a lifetime of choices that prioritized independence over connection, strategy over sentiment, survival over love. Her daughter never forgave her. Her audiences eventually forgot her. The world she had conquered moved on to moving pictures and radio waves and forms of celebrity that did not require the physical presence of a beautiful woman in a room. But the architecture she created endures. Every celebrity endorsement, every personal brand, every beautiful woman who looks in the mirror and sees not just a face, but a business plan. Lillie Langtry was there first. She figured it out in a black dress, in a room full of diamonds, in a London that had never seen anything like her and would never see anything quite like her again. The system was designed to consume women. She refused to be consumed. and the price of that refusal was a solitude that money could soften but never cure. She paid it. She paid it every day in the villa on the cliff, with the poodles in the next room and the Mediterranean glittering below like a promise that had finally been kept, but that no longer mattered. A contemporary said it would be hell to be married to her because she was too damn bright. He was right about the brightness. He was wrong about the hell. The hell was not being married to Lillie Langtry. The hell was being Lillie Langtry and knowing that the very qualities that made you extraordinary were the same qualities that guaranteed you would end up, at last, alone. She was 75 years old. She had outrun every boundary drawn around her. Every boundary except the last.